Hey leader, David Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 4 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the 5 worst ideas in management. Okay, business is full of bad ideas. I mean, I hate saying that, right? But business is really full of bad ideas. It's a function of the beast, right? When you have lots of people running organizations, you have lots of different experiments, and so you have lots of different approaches to running a company, to running a whole organization. That's not a problem. Widespread experimentation is great because sometimes we can default into finding the best way to lead. We can develop best practices that truly are best. But sometimes bad ideas get a little bit of momentum behind them that pushes them a lot further than the quality of the idea. Sometimes you end up feeling like something is a best practice when actually it's a bad idea. Sometimes it feels like everybody's doing it or one successful organization claims that they're doing it, and as a result, now everyone else is rushing to do it, and that's a problem. And over the past several decades, we've had quite a few of them. And what's interesting is that I find in my work with organizations, not only as a speaker, but as a consultant, as a coach to executives, I find I have to correct a lot of those bad ideas over and over and over again. So in this video, we're going to talk about the 5 worst ideas in management and also what the good idea behind the bad idea really is. Let's get started. The first worst idea in management, and this list is not ranked, by the way, but this might actually be the worst idea in management: stacked ranking. In other words, taking the annual performance review, we'll get to that one, taking the annual performance review and using it to rank everybody. Maybe a physical ranking 1 through 10 of all your people, or maybe just sorting a certain percentage of the entire company into A players, B players, and C players. And if this sounds familiar, either you work in an organization where this was the case, or you heard about people like Jack Welch and Turning Around GE that was a huge fan of the idea of stack ranking. Now, why is it such a bad idea? Well, it rests on 2 assumptions, right? The first assumption it rests on is that humans are accurate judges of performance of other humans, right? It rests on the assumption that performance reviews are actually accurate. I know, we'll get to that one because that's another one of these ideas. But it also rests on the idea that if you have A, B, and C players, what you're supposed to do is really feed those A's, give them more opportunities, more money, nurture the B's, see who can become A's, and fire the C's. And the idea is that you could fire 10 to 20% of the bottom performers in your organization every year and then find new and better people every single time. It's that last bit that's the really dangerous assumption, right? That last little bit that you can fire off the bottom 20% and then find new talented people. We know that talent isn't as portable as it seems, and we know that talent is massively affected by the quality of a team you're on. And if you're an organization that's doing stacked ranking, what does the quality of your teams look like? It's probably not all that nurturing and developing. So what's a better approach to stacked ranking? Honest feedback. Here's where you are. Don't necessarily rank people, but let's talk about where you want to go in your own career and then where you are on that path. Let people's desire to grow and improve and make progress be the thing that inspires them to improve their skill set, inspires them to be more engaged in work, motivates them more to put in effort at work. Let that progress be the thing that motivates them, not the fact that we gave them a grade like it's high school all over again. That doesn't motivate anybody. It usually just dissatisfies the B's, and it eliminates some C's on the assumption that we'll find more A's, and we probably won't. The second worst idea in management, okay, let's get to it, let's talk about it, is performance reviews. Okay, performance reviews aren't actually a bad idea. What's bad about performance reviews is that we've turned it into such a systematic process, such a rigid process that most organizations can barely stand to go through that process annually. And annual performance reviews are a recipe for failure. Feedback is delivered too late. It's usually too generic. We bundle all of the tasks that someone has to do in a job into 4 or 5 categories, like with generic names like collaboration, and then we give you an exceeds or meets or whatever, which is equally generic and vague, right? So not only is the feedback too late, it's usually too vague and too generic. Instead, regular ongoing coaching. Feedback is fine. Feedback is fantastic. Feedback needs to be quick. It needs to be based on observed behaviors, and it also needs to be more in the form of coaching, helping people figure out and co-create how they can get better. That's the type of feedback that actually gets people better. Just circling back with them 8 months after you observed a behavior and then possibly tying their chances of promotion or raises into something that they may have already changed because you took so long to give them feedback that this is now irrelevant. I mean, we already know that's not working, so I'm not even gonna ask, how's that working for you? We know it's not. Performance reviews are a great idea. Annual reviews, highly systematized reviews, things that actually are too late and too generic, that's one of the worst ideas in management. The next worst idea in management, personality testing. Not all of them, just the vast majority of them. And just like performance reviews, the idea behind personality testing, the idea behind personality assessments, it seems like a good idea. People are different. People have different personalities, different perspectives, different knowledge, skills, and abilities, different worldviews, and that's fine. In fact, we want that. We want diversity of opinion, we want diversity of experiences, because if that's paired with psychological safety and a spirit of collaboration, we make better decisions because we see the world from all of these different perspectives. And so the goal of doing things like personality testing is to leverage that diversity and to talk about it, right? To presumably help us make better decisions because we appreciate each other and help us reduce conflict because we appreciate each other. The problem with personality testing is that what we know from the world of personality testing, from the psychology of personality, is different than how most organizations are applying it. Most organizations are using tests that were developed 30 or 40 years ago when we still believed that there were personality types. There are no personality types. There are personality dimensions, and you can score differently on those dimensions. And we can have a conversation about how different people score differently on those dimensions. But if the extent of our personality testing is labeling people and finding out that your Myers-Briggs might be ENTJ and mine is NSFW, that doesn't really mean anything. First of all, because the Myers-Briggs is a terrible test. We've got videos on that already. But second of all, because those labels aren't actually representative of what's going on. Human personality is far too complex to be put into boxes, whether it's 4, whether it's 8, whether it's 16, it's far too complicated. The other thing we know is that personalities actually change. They change over time, and they change depending on the circumstances you're in. So figuring out where someone is on a personality dimension element, that's gonna be a much more productive conversation. The last thing I'll say about personality testing is in addition to using the wrong test, we're overusing them. In other words, sometimes we're using them for selection decisions, sometimes we're using them for conflict resolution when what we actually need is more clear roles and responsibilities. Sometimes we're using them because we used them last year and everybody felt good afterwards. None of those are valid reasons. The only valid reason for personality testing is to help the team better understand each other and have empathy for the differences between them and how those differences play into a strength. And if you're gonna do that, then you might as well use a tool that actually represents those differences, which is an assessment that scores people on a scale and not a type. The next worst idea in management, or another worst idea in management, open offices. Now this is a banner that I have been waving around like crazy for almost a decade now. Just like everything else, just like most worst ideas, the goal of this was valid. We looked at Silicon Valley and we looked at startup culture and we saw all of these open offices and we heard quotes from Steve Jobs about designing the Pixar office and all of this need for serendipitous collisions. We never actually did any research on it, but we found out that open offices save a ton of money, that you can cram more people in. And years later, we found out that no, when we started to do the research on it, those serendipitous collisions, there's no evidence that they actually happen. That increase in collaboration actually decreases in an open office. In addition, people are more likely to experience stress, more likely to be distracted, more likely to call in sick. I still haven't figured out if they're legitimately sick or if they're just sick of their open office. But in all cases, it doesn't actually lead to the best outcome, the best environment for people to work. Now, what is the best environment for people to work? Doesn't actually matter. What matters is that people have a sense of autonomy over where they work. So if you're designing an office space, the best bet is to create a palette of different places. Places where they can go to have one-on-one privacy, right, and have short meetings with another person, large collaboration spaces, places where they can go to hide and work by themselves. To give people a lot of different spaces. And this means you probably need more space than people based on old metrics around how many people per square foot or square meter you can fit into a space. It means you need more than that if you're going to create it. Or you need to have way more flexible expectations about when people are at the office. You need to trust that they're doing the work even if you can't see them, and let them pick where they do their best work. And the last worst idea in management, right sizing. There's two things here, actually. The first is that right sizing is just a terrible euphemism for laying people off. But the second is that it's often a knee-jerk reaction. We're not actually concerned with getting the right size of people in the organization. We're concerned about making the quarterly projections. We're concerned about saving a tiny bit of money. We're concerned about something financial and not something people-oriented. And this is a problem. We know from research that layoffs usually beget more layoffs. We also know that layoffs make the people who survived still feel less secure in their job. Right? So you might save a little bit of money in the short term, but you're getting less engaged, more worried employees in the long term. The other thing is that right sizing doesn't really point to the real problem. The real problem is that we made strategic decisions at a senior leadership level that turned out to be wrong. Why did that happen? People on the front lines who signed on to your mission and signed on to your pay and benefits package and decided to be part of your organization, the idea that we're going to cut them first for our bad decisions, that's a pretty bad idea, right? And we know this because we know that leaders who seek to kind of share that burden, who have honest, open book policies, even when there are financial setbacks, they not only turn those setbacks around faster by doing things like asking everybody to tap into paid off vacation days and maybe furlough more, by taking pay cuts themselves that are deeper and more severe than what we're asking of frontline employees, but also are more empathetic all around. They end up with a more engaged workforce that helps them actively figure out how we get out of this mess, right? Making it about we and not just about who is staying and who is not has a massive effect on the people who are staying. And they're the people that matter because they're the people that are going to be turning you around and getting your business right even after you failed at right sizing. That's not to say that you can avoid layoffs altogether. Sometimes it happens. Just make sure it's the last thing that happens. Now, these 5 ideas, these are not the only bad ideas in management. They're not the only bad ideas in business. We still need to talk about the Segway scooter and Pets.com, but we'll save that for a different video. But they all represent something. They all represent good ideas, well-intentioned ideas that were poorly thought out and poorly executed. And so what we really need to do is not just correct these ideas, but correct the line of thinking. Before you know something is a good idea or a bad idea, we ought to be testing it. We ought to be looking for the research. Most of the ideas you heard me say started out this way, then we looked at the data, and the problem is that we didn't course correct. I'm a big fan of the quote from W. Edwards Deming, "In God we trust, all others bring data." Right? Making these decisions, promoting these ideas before we've seen the final result. These are a recipe for disaster. They're a recipe for thinking that what is actually a worst practice is a best practice. And we want to avoid them, but more importantly, we want to make better decisions about our people. Decisions that help people be more engaged, decisions that give people more autonomy, and decisions that help people do their best work ever.